Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you 3 tips to reduce tension and improve evenness in the Schubert Impromptu Opus 90 number 3. So without further ado, let's get into it. So this impromptu is probably one of the most popular Schubert impromptus, and it's probably actually one of my favorites as well. And I studied it a few years back when I was doing my undergrad, and I remember learning a lot through this, and I thought today I would share the 3 tips that I found the most helpful. So let's go ahead and talk about those. So the first tip is to practice letting go of the melody notes first, okay? So you can, of course, play this where you hold on to those upper notes. Etc. That's fine as long as you're really loose and you're not really gripping that upper note. The problem is that the tendency is to stretch out the hand, isolate the fingers, grip that upper note, and a lot of tension builds from there, okay? First, what you're going to do is you're going to start by just letting go of the notes and really just focus on that inner voice, okay? So you can play the upper note, let go, you'll notice that I'm playing the melody note and I'm letting go. I'm making sure my 5th finger comes with me so that I can really focus on the inner voice, making sure it's really, really smooth, okay? Now, the pedal can keep that note in. Eventually, especially on this piano, I'm using a lot less pedal, or at least I'm trying to. This pedal is not the greatest, but so I do think that eventually you can come back to holding that note because I would use a little less pedal. But by letting go of that note first, you can really focus on those inner notes, right? The inner voice. And you can make sure that you're really using your ear to make that upper line sound legato. I think a lot of times we think of legato as a physical connection, okay? I play this note, and I don't let go of this note until I play the next note. That's how we sort of start teaching legato, right? But what actually is more important in making something sound legato is not necessarily a physical connection, right? Playing this, did that sound particularly legato? No, it didn't, because the sound doesn't match, right? And so what's actually more helpful when we play legato is matching the sound. So for instance here, I'm going to grow, and then here, a little bit less there, okay? So I'm not connecting those at all physically, but I'm matching the sound. The sound's growing and then decaying after that, or even having that the same amount of sound. So the notes really blend into each other. And so by letting go of that upper note and conscientiously doing that, as well as keeping you from stretching the hand and isolating the fingers, it's also going to help you really focus on keeping that inner voice even and really using your ear. And this is a really, really great exercise. Now, the second tip is to shape the inner notes physically. And what I mean by that is you're not just going to play the notes. See how my arm and my hand are just sitting in one position. I'm going to make sure that I really shape that inner voice physically with my arm and my hand. So I'm using kind of a circular gesture here. And what this is going to do is this is going to make sure that, first of all, I'm not isolating the fingers, okay, like we already talked about, but it's also going to make sure that my arm, hand, and fingers are all working together to play the notes. Okay, it's going to make sure that my arm is shifting behind my hand and fingers so that I'm always aligned and centered behind each note. Because, for instance, if I'm in this position, maybe I'm aligned behind my 4th finger, but I'm not going to be aligned behind my 2nd and my thumb. And if we think of some of the fingers being stronger and some being more weak, right? Like 4 is weaker, we need more support from the arm. That doesn't mean we don't need it on the thumb and the second finger, right? The thumb is notoriously a heavy finger. It's hard to not accent it at times, okay? So making sure that I'm not just relying on the strength of an individual finger, but I'm actually using my arm. My arm helps me sort of shift weight into each key, and so I can be aligned behind each finger. And this will enable you to have much greater control of the sound, okay? And if we don't really do this, if we just try to rely on the fingers, we don't really shape that physically, we don't use a sort of a circular gesture there, we're going to be kind of, essentially fighting against our body and the way it naturally wants to work. Now, tip number 3 is to use more circular gestures to connect melody notes and shift across the keyboard. And what I mean by that is, right now what we're talking about thinking of playing the melody notes down and releasing, and then I'm kind of using a bit of a circle motion on the inner notes. And then when I go back to those upper notes, I'm maybe using some rotation to sort of swing across, etc. Okay? But there are certain passages, and I'm going to point out 2, that I'm going to use a larger gesture to play both the melody notes and the inner voices. So for instance, if you look at measure 3, we have this. This is just like the beginning. But then here I'm going to use a circle, 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 circle. Okay, so that's one large gesture. So again, that's going to be circle, 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 circle. And it helps me connect from this note, okay? Let's see, to here, connect to this note, okay? And even here, I'm going to use, this is going to be a little bit of a larger circular motion here. Okay, so this is one example. Another example of where you're going to use a larger gesture there to combine the melody notes and the inner voices. Another one is measure 7, right? So right here on the second beat, right there. Okay, so the second half of the measure, right? So this part, etc. Okay, and those are 2 specific places. There are other places in the piece as well, and you can really pick them out. Any piece that's similar like that, where we have the melody moving in more quarter notes, because if you think about just shaping the inner voice like we are in the beginning, that has sort of its own sort of gesture, and we're using rotation to get back up to that top note. If you think about these sections, which again, they're pretty easy to find throughout the piece, the second half of measure 3, what kind of gesture would you use here? It's just 2 notes, right? Right? So if you see something like this where I go, that sort of a thing, that fits really perfectly with that sort of circular gesture. And what this really helps with, as well as that, is it helps, again, shift from note to note. Okay, this is a much easier thing to do, especially if I want to really emphasize those notes, because I'm sort of swinging back around. See, I'm sort of swinging to the side, so it's a little bit easier to emphasize that. But it also makes it easier as one large movement versus a bunch of really small movements. And that really, really, really helps. So always thinking about how I'm going to move across a measure, how I'm going to sort of accommodate these notes within the framework of technique, within the framework of gesture. So these 3 tips, letting go of the notes, the melody notes at first, making sure to shape the inner voice, make sure that you're not just staying in one position there, And then also using those larger circular gestures to encompass melody notes and harmony notes when the situation calls for it. Those are the three most helpful things that I found when I was studying this piece, and it really does make it feel really, really good. Now, I don't necessarily always let go of those top notes. Sometimes I hold on to them a little bit more because, especially on this piano, the pedal is not great. So I would use a little bit less pedal. And what that means is that if I let go of this note, then it's gone, okay? So sometimes I have to be able to hang on to that. And again, the piano is going to determine how much you have to do that. Okay, if the pedal's going to hold the note in, then you don't really need to, once you've really practiced this in and it feels really good, you don't have to go back to holding the notes necessarily. It really depends on the piano. But there are circumstances where I try to hold on to it a little bit more because I have to use less pedal. Like later when you have the some more sort of melodic things happening in the bass, you have to be much more careful with the pedaling there. But what you have to do, what you have to make sure that you do really, really well, if you're going to hold on to those melody notes, you have to make sure that you're not, like I mentioned, gripping to that top note. If you grip that top note, right, if you're not just really loose, you're just sitting there, okay, then you're going to get tension. And so you have to be really, really loose, okay? And that's why I think that practicing by letting go of the notes first is really helpful, and practicing by shaping that inner voice, because when you go back to, let's say, holding on to these notes more, notice that there is still shape to that. See that? Okay? Even these spots like this, right? There's still shape to all of that together, so I'm still using those gestures. But if I'm going to hold on to those top notes, I have to make sure that I'm really, really loose and I'm approaching the music from a good foundation of technique. Alright guys, so that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found the video interesting and informative. And if you have any questions or comments, make sure and leave those down below. Also, if you have any requests for future videos, leave those in the comments down below. I always love hearing from you. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.